Hi everyone, it's Jill Foster here for Penny Black with a new Positively Penny Black video. And during these troubling times, we are committed to bringing our followers positive messages of inspiration, hope, art, distraction, and sharing. So let's go ahead and get started with today's card. This is the card that we will be creating today. It features some critters and springtime flowers, and we're doing some masking just to add some extra charm and fun to both of these images. Now, before we begin, I want to mention that I will have a full supply list for you up on screen at the very end of the video. So if you want to check out any of the supplies that I'm using, stamps, die cuts, markers, colors, everything will be listed at that time, and you can just hit pause. So to begin, we will be stamping our miniature transparent set called Blossoming Boots. I think this is just the cutest little image, has a fun sentiment that comes with it, and I especially love those polka dots on those boots. So I'm just sort of laying out my design, and I am stamping onto Strathmore Bristol cardstock. This is a smooth paper which works really well with the markers I will be using to paint and color this in. Now, I am stamping this using Ranger Archival ink in the color of jet black, but any type of waterproof ink will work for this technique. And now I am going to, while it's in my MISTI, just go ahead and stamp this onto some Eclipse masking paper. So I just put that in there, and then I'm going to stamp this down, and then I will go ahead and cut out the mask. And that masking paper is just kind of like a giant sticky note. Now for our next layer of stamping, we're going to use one of these super adorable critters from our transparent set, Lighthearted. And if you're looking for an escape and some fun and just some positivity, I highly recommend getting out your critter stamps and doing some stamping and coloring with them. They are really a great distraction and just something happy right now. So I've masked off that boot, and you can see I only needed to cut just a little part of the mask, so it's not that hard to do. It's not very time consuming. And now I've positioned that little hedgie, and I'm going to stamp him peeking out from behind the boot. And this hedgie is actually the perfect little match because he's actually holding a little boot of flowers. So I thought it went really well with this particular image. So I'll remove the mask. I love that part, and we'll be ready to start our coloring. Now I'm going to be doing my coloring using a combination of Arteza Real Brush Pens and Arteza Twi markers. These are both a water-based marker, and they really blend beautifully on this Bristol paper. You can blend them with or without water. You can layer them together as I'm doing here. My choice between the two markers is sort of twofold. One, I have my favorite colors in each set, so usually I just pick whatever color I like best. So if my favorite pink is a Real Brush pen, then that's the pink I'm going to grab. Or if my favorite purple, like in this case was a Twi marker, I'm going to grab it from that. I also like to reach for the Twi markers when I am doing something very detailed, as they have a nice fine sturdy tip, and the Real Brush pens have more of the tip of an actual paintbrush, so there's just some variety there in how the color goes on and feels when you are coloring with them. Now you can see I colored with the pink and I added the purple. Then I wanted to add a touch more of some blending with that purple, so I colored it onto an acrylic block, just a non-porous surface to use as a palette, picked it up with my paintbrush and then painted it on, and then actually went back over again with that pink to blend it a little bit more. You can see on the little tiny boot there I did not need to use any water, just colored it with the pink, added the darker shading with the purple, and went back and blended it with my pink marker. If you have any contamination on your markers, like from putting it on top of another color, just keep a little scratch piece of that Bristol paper next to you, and you can color it off afterward until your marker color's clean. So you can see here on not all of these, I'm not using water for all of them. For especially some of these smaller images up here in this bouquet, I am just going to do the coloring and blending with the markers. And again, that Bristol paper makes a huge difference in doing this. So you can see I colored with the light, added the darker, and then went back with the light to blend them together. Here I'm going to move on to the stems and the greenery. Now my jet black archival ink was really like on its last leg. It needs to be re-inked. Now, so it's a little bit faded here on this, and that's just because my ink pad was needs some re-inker, but I actually like how it turned out. I think it gave it a little bit of a no-line look up here where I've put some darker colors on the greenery and just blended it out and gave it a soft look instead of a harsh black outline. So if you're wanting that, you may want to stamp this with like a lighter gray ink. You could also do no-line coloring techniques with this as well. And with this stamping and masking, I just love how you can combine your stamps in different ways to create a whole different scene. And there's just something so fun and creative about that. That's just a whole nother way to sort of stretch your mind and use things creatively. Now I felt like these boots were just a little bit more purple than I wanted them to be, so I wanted to just add a light wash of a red over the top just to give them more of a like a bubblegum pink sort of color. So I colored that onto the acrylic block and I'm just picking it up with a little bit of water on my paintbrush. Now the Bristol paper does really well with water on top, but it's not quite as strong as a watercolor paper. So I do try to not use too much water when I am blending or picking it up off the palette with my paintbrush. Here I'm just adding some more color and I'm kind of doing both bouquets at the same time so that they tie together. Here I can use the very fine tip on the twine marker to color in the green on these flowers. It's super handy to have that really fine tip. I even traced over the stems there to darken them. And here I'm going to do some coloring on this larger flower. You can see I've put down that color, the red, and then I'm moving in with a little touch of orange, just blending them, marker right on the paper, not using any water. Then some yellow, and then I will color that on that scratch paper off to the side to remove any of the red from that yellow. Now you could stamp this in a Copic friendly ink and color it with your Copic markers. You could stamp it onto watercolor paper and color with your watercolors. You really can use whatever coloring medium you have or in the mood to use. It's just really the fun for me of doing this masking, kind of combining some more elegant type of floral stamps with the critters to create some happy springtime cards. And for me, I was just needing and in the mood for some cute little critters to be staring at those while I was coloring something just lighthearted and different than just the elegant florals. So I'm just going to add just a touch here. This you can see with this twine marker, it has that nice sturdy edge. It's really great for these finer details. Now I'm moving on to the hedgie. I decided to do him in just a little bit of gray. We'll grab my paintbrush. And like I said before, the exact colors of each marker, my paintbrushes, inks, stamps, dies, all of that will be listed on screen at the very end of the video. So you can just hit pause to see those if you want to see that in more detail. Here I'm going to work on the rest of the hedgie. I find I really love when painting critters especially to use some type of watercolor medium. I mean, you can definitely do them with your Copics or your alcohol-based markers, but it's for me, it's easier to sort of like on that hedgie's body to blend from that lighter tan down into the white. That's easier for me to do with a watercolor as opposed to a alcohol based marker. So it is something you may want to give a try if you are just trying out with critters or you've had a little bit of trouble coloring them in with alcohol based markers. Here I wanted to add a little bit of background painting, but very light, very subtle. It actually hardly shows up in the photos at the very end, but it is there. I think it adds just a little bit. So I colored again onto that old acrylic block with the marker first, and then picked it up with my paintbrush and some water. I had a little bit of bleeding there with that red, and so I'm just using sort of a thirsty brush or a drier brush to try and lift that up. If I had known that this is the color that I was going to want for the background, I would have done this first, but oftentimes I don't really know until I see how the rest of the colors take shape on the image. So if you do know you want to use a blue sky or a turquoise sky, you might want to do that first, but if you're like me and you don't know yet, you just kind of got to be careful that you don't re-wet any of those areas you've already colored. Now I wanted to ground this image, so I'm just coloring with lighter green and then a little bit darker green right here under the boots. And then I will go in with my paintbrush to blend that. With my paintbrush, I have it in water, and then before I put it to the paper, I do dab it onto a paper towel so that it's just not quite as wet and I have a little bit more control of the water. And I'm focusing my blending on the edges of where I have colored so that I can sort of blend those out into the white. It certainly does not need to be perfect. So to finish off this panel, all I did was use our Stitches of Love die cut. To die cut that, I just wanted to add a little bit something extra to the border, and you can get a look at that here in this photo. Since it was a pretty simple card, I felt like that helped, and I also stamped my sentiment in black. So here is a look at the finished card. Again, this you could use for any occasion, just change up your sentiment to suit your needs. I thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed today's video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button, and don't forget to ring the bell so you will receive a notification every time we post a new video. And we also invite you to really, at this time, fill your feed with our Facebook, Instagram, and blog posts, which are filled with all things happy. And I've linked to all of those for you down in the YouTube description box below. And here's the supply list as promised.